terrified me at least. And so I read thousands of pages of biographies and came to the conclusion that it was actually very simple. Napoleon was a genius of organization. And it sounds very mundane and banal, but I firmly believe that that is the essence of his power. And what I mean was he had an ability, he had a brain, a mind like a computer. He could absorb massive amounts of information, and he did, about the enemy, about his own army, about the technology at the time, about cannons and gunfire. He had spies all over Europe giving him detailed information about the enemy's army. And with this massive amount of information that he had, and he took notes and put them all on note cards, etc., he was able to organize this material in a very efficient manner and use that to come up with incredibly brilliant strategies, not only for how to defeat the enemy, but also for how to organize his own army in the most efficient manner. And so when he entered into battle, he was so much more prepared than the enemy. He knew more about them than they knew about their own army. He knew more about the terrain, about what he could expect from his own forces. And with this level of preparation and organization, he overwhelmed Europe again and again and again. And then finally a point was reached where he couldn't surmount the difficulties. He couldn't organize his ideas and his army because he was facing too many crises, many of them his own doing, and that kind of led to his downfall. His genius, he kind of reversed itself, and he suffered a terrible decline. But to me, that was the essence of his creativity. You don't think of organization and creativity in the same sentence, but if you read the Strategies of War, you'll see that he was intensely creative when it came to organizing the massive amount of details that waging a war require. To me, that's the essence of Napoleon.
In the 48 Laws of Power, you talk about the use of surrender as a tactic to transform weakness into power, and I think this is extremely instructive. But it doesn't fit with our paradigm of how we're supposed to proceed with things. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, sometimes, as I said earlier, people associate power with aggression and violence, and I'm saying sometimes yielding and giving in is actually the superior form of power. The classic example would be Gandhi's use of passive resistance, where surrendering literally and refusing to fight back actually becomes a kind of a weapon. And it became a weapon so powerful that it essentially drove the English out of India. I talk in the book of an example that some people might not like, but I thought was very instructive. It was about Bertolt Brecht, the great German playwright, who was called before the House Un-American Activities, excuse me, I don't remember the exact name, in the United States, accused of being a communist sympathizer. And all of the people that had been called up before, Hollywood writers, etc., who were later blacklisted, essentially took a pretty aggressive stand demonstrating their dislike of the committee's existence. And Brecht instead used a version of the surrender tactic. It was almost a kind of superior irony. He was extremely ironic in the way only a kind of a European could be in dealing with sort of America. And he didn't insult the members. He was almost kind of indirectly insulting them, but they didn't realize it. And in the end, they let him go, and because he was trying to get out of the United States, and he could have ended up in prison. By taking the surrender tactic, they let him go. He returned to Europe, and he wrote many more plays. And the idea was, what was more important in this situation? Was it kind of making a point to the public, but then sort of suffering for it and then not being able to work? Or in the long run, what was important was having a platform to write your plays and to be productive and to get the last laugh in here. And so he decided it was better to surrender in the moment and then in the long run get the last word in. And I found that very powerful, and I think that's sort of a classic example of using the surrender tactic.
When asking for help, appealing to people's self-interest and never to their mercy or gratitude, Law 13, it kind of feels when I hear that people are mostly wired, human beings are wired for their own self-interest, and they can't really help it. Is Law 13 an acknowledgement of the human condition on your part? Is that your way of translating that there's a human condition and this is pretty much what it most of the time is?
Well, I don't mean to say that you can't appeal to people's sense of compassion. People do that all the day, and we have charitable organizations that exist. So I'm not trying to say that the world is 100% governed by self-interest. I would find that overly cynical or just cynical. But on the other hand, we are always underestimating the level of self-interest that governs people's decisions. And so I use the classic example in there of ancient Greece. There was a group of people who were trying to make an alliance with Athens to become a power on the peninsula. And, one group of people appealed to the sense of gratitude that the Athenians must feel because they had helped Athens before in previous battles. And this other group, a different city, just simply said, look, we're going to be able to give you this, A, B, and C, if you join us in an alliance. And naturally they chose the one that appealed to Athens' sense of self-interest. And the idea is that, oftentimes we think, well, we helped someone do something before, and now they owe us a favor. But people very quickly will forget any sense of gratitude or what they owe you. They'll think, well, I really didn't do that much for you, or that was in the past. You must think, if you're trying to get someone to help you or do something for you, you must put yourself in their shoes, and it's not easy. And you must say to yourself, what is it that they want? Not what I want, which is what we always do. Well, what do they want? If I can think of how in some way I can appeal to their self-interest, that in helping me they're actually doing something for themselves, then you're going to win the argument. And it's very unnatural for us to do it. It takes a lot of thinking and planning, but it's the much higher level of strategizing. And understanding that other people have self-interest involved and you're appealing to them is not cynical, it's not ugly, it's simply admitting the fact that you understand that they have their own needs and desires and you're going to appeal to that. It's actually, to me, a pretty good gesture in some ways.
When I read the chapter that talked about what happened with Tesla, which many of us love and appreciate and are sad his inventions are not in full throttle today, at least some of them are, but they're involved in black projects and not in the things that society get to have access to. What happened with him and Edison was very instructive. I wanted you to share something about that, and I want to know what the ultimate message of that chapter was, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, that was the law that I mentioned earlier about get other people to do the
yes.
always take the credit, and essentially that is what Edison had done with Tesla. I mean, Tesla, I've been doing research on Thomas Edison now for the 50th Law,
right,
and then for my new book, and he's not really. In the first book, I might have painted him as like a kind of a villain in a way, and he really isn't. He was actually a very brilliant man, but Tesla was much more brilliant. Let's
Indeed.
put it that way. Tesla was one of the great creative scientific thinkers of our time. Supposedly, he had a mind that was just so different and amazing. He could solve an entire mechanical problem in his head. In other words, he could imagine the bit of machinery that he wanted to create, and he could visualize inside all of the machinery and the gears and the things that went into it before he literally put it on paper. So he was some